Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I have had such an incredible opportunity to travel around the States and to meet different people and to work with different people. And I think the one thing that I find we all have in common, in fact, I haven't met one person yet who doesn't have this in common, with me at least, is that we all have problems. I don't know anybody who doesn't. I mean, we all have those days when, let's face it, we don't want to get out of bed. You know, it would just be easier to pull the covers up over our head and hibernate. I'm afraid as I sat down listening to the opening ceremonies and saying what a successful person does in the morning, I was like, wow, I don't do that, or that, or that. Breakfast is usually first thing on my agenda in the morning. But we just all have those days. We all do. And the one thing that we can all do, and that we do, is that we make choices every day. We decide if we are going to get up, if we are going to keep on going, and what we're going to do, how we're going to react. And these choices have changed my life in just ways I can't even imagine. As a 14-year-old girl, I was basically the definition of a wallflower. I mean, I was shy, I was quiet, I did not feel the need to be in the spotlight. That was just me. I remember being about to graduate from junior high, and I was so excited. I just could not wait. I don't know about you, but when I think back to junior high, one word comes to mind: awkward. Oh my goodness. The girls' locker room. Oh, we don't even need to go there. Anyways, I remember being so excited to go on to high school. I just could not wait. And it was the day before my junior high graduation, and I remember going home, and I remember talking to my parents and begging them to let me go on this trip with my friend. She'd invited me, and they didn't really like the idea, but I remember finally getting them to agree, and I just felt like the stars in my life were aligning, like everything was perfect, nothing could go wrong. I was getting out of junior high, I was going to high school, I was going to go on this trip with my friend. I mean, just everything was perfect. I mean, at least for me. Yeah, I still had to, clean my room and do my chores, but that seemed like impossible to get out of. But everything else was really, really great. I remember going to bed next to my younger sister. We've shared a room almost since the day she was born. And I remember falling asleep in bed next to her. Well, the next thing I heard was a man's voice. And boys were not allowed in my room. So at first I thought, well, this has to be a dream. It has to be something I made up. I mean, it has to be that funny state in between asleep and awake. I mean, this just can't really be happening. And so I just laid there, and then I heard the voice again. And this time, I could feel someone's hand on my arm and something cold and sharp lying across my neck. So when the voice said, "I have a knife at your neck. Don't make a sound. Get up and come with me," I knew that it was not a dream. I knew that there really was a stranger in my room, and there really was a knife at my neck. I remember immediately getting up and doing exactly what this man told me to do. Nothing in my entire life had ever prepared me for a moment like that. I remember he brought me way, way, way back up into the mountains, where I was then taken into a tent. And this tent, it was so well hidden. It was so hard to get to. And it was just, you could walk right by it and you just wouldn't see it because the trees were so thick. It was in such an unlikely spot just nobody would ever find it. I remember being brought into the tent, and this woman, she was there, and she brought in a small basin, and she started to try to undress me and bathe me. And as I mentioned, I was very shy, and sort of to help you get to know me a little bit better, an experience from not too long before, embarrassingly enough, I'd like to share with you. I come from an extremely large family. I mean, on my mom's side alone, I have over 50 cousins. That's a lot of family, and I am thankful for every single one of them. However, I played the harp, and anytime one of my cousins got married, I got called upon to play the reception music. And I wasn't always thrilled about that, because that meant that the whole night I wouldn't talk to anyone or get to, eat the desserts or play around or chat with my cousins. No, it just meant I'd be playing. So I wasn't overly excited about that. So at this one cousin's wedding, I was playing and playing and playing, and I needed to excuse myself. It had been a while, and I needed to visit the ladies' room. So I got up, and I wandered over to the bathroom. When I finished, I came back, and I was like, oh, well, I'm not quite ready to go back and play, so I'm going to take the scenic way back to the harp. I'm going to go over by the dessert table and, have a piece of cake, and then walk around, and then I'll go back to the harp and start playing again. Well, as I was making my way through the crowd, I started to notice some people were kind of laughing and just kind of giving you the funny look. And I kept thinking, well, what's wrong? Oh, well, must be a joke I missed. Anyways, I'm making my way slowly when all of a sudden my mom comes up to me and she says, Elizabeth, dear, you've got a little problem. You have tucked the back of your dress into your underwear. Now, I just about died. Oh, I ran straight to that bathroom, and I didn't come out until my mom came to get me, I don't know, like 2 hours later when everyone was packing up and leaving. And she said, Elizabeth, it's okay. I mean, the important thing is that you had clean underwear on, and as long as you had that, it doesn't really matter. It's okay. I did, not that you want to know, but I still was just mortified. And I am so happy that there's so many women here today, because I'm sure you understand what I mean. Between your underwear and your nylons and your slip and your dress, that is so many layers that men just don't even know exist. Oh. Simple mistake, but let me just tell you, trying to avoid as many people in my family is near impossible. I was so embarrassed. I did not want to go to the next wedding. I did not want to go to the next family party. My mom forced me to, but I was mortified for a long time after that happened. Now, if you can imagine just a simple mistake, just something that embarrassing, that small, you could imagine or begin to imagine how that would make me feel, being told I need to be washed and undressed by a complete stranger, just about the farthest thing I ever wanted. I remember begging and pleading, but it just didn't matter to this woman. She finally told me that if I didn't allow her to bathe me and undress me, that she would have Emmanuel, which was the name of the man as I knew him in that moment, who had kidnapped me. She said he would come in and he would rip off my pajamas and he would bathe me and then dress me. Well, out of all things I didn't want, that was probably at the top of my list. So I remember telling her that I had showered last night and I was not dirty and that I could change myself. Just give me what you want me to put on. She finally passed me a robe that was just like the robe she had on, and I pulled it over my head, and then she told me to take off my clothes underneath, and I did, and she got up and took my clothes with her and left me alone. And I just remember sitting on this bucket being so scared. The only stories I had ever heard about kidnapping always ended with the child being dead, with a body being found maybe a day later, maybe weeks, maybe years later, maybe it would just be a couple of bones. But that was it. I mean, there were no happy endings that I had ever heard of from a kidnapping. And I remember just sitting on that bucket crying and just feeling so alone and so scared. How had this happened to me? When all of a sudden the tent door unzipped and in walked this man. And he came over and he looked at me and then he knelt down next to me and he started speaking. Well, how could I even begin to listen to what he was saying when I was so worried and scared about what was happening to me? What was happening to my family? Were they okay? Or had he been through my house already and killed everyone? Well, I knew he hadn't killed my sister, but what if he killed everyone else? What if she woke up to a house full of dead people? What would happen to her? And if they weren't dead, did they know I was gone yet? Were they looking for me yet? I mean, I had a million thoughts going through my head in that moment. But somehow I pulled myself together just long enough to hear the last sentence that he said, which was, "I hereby seal you to me as my wife before God and his angels as my witnesses." Well, out of everything I expected to hear, that was not one of them. That was just about the farthest thing that I could have ever expected. I remember just screaming out, "No! Who did he think he was, telling me all of a sudden I'm his wife? I'm 14 years old. What is wrong with this man?" When I screamed out no, he looked at me and he said, "If you ever scream out like that again, I will kill you." I didn't want to be killed, but he had to realize that this was not okay and that I never said yes or I do or, he had no legal authority. I didn't know him. Who did he think he was? And when I tried to point out all these reasons, they didn't really matter to him. In fact, anytime I pointed out any reason, he'd come back with the same thing, saying, "We need to consummate our marriage now." Now, you could say that, yes, I was raised somewhat in a bubble, that my parents, they were quite strict. PG-13 movies, no, that wasn't allowed. Words like stupid or idiot, those were considered swear words. My parents were very strict, very protective. They were very loving, but they wanted to protect our childhood. And so they didn't want us to see things or hear things that would, take away from our childhood. I don't know, you'd probably have to ask them that question, but I think it's something along those lines. So when he said, "No, we need to consummate our marriage," I didn't exactly know what that meant. From the context, I could guess, but I thought, no, that can't be what it means. That can't be what that means. I remember just crying and begging this man just to let me go, just to not do whatever he was going to do to me. Nothing I said made a difference. He finally just grabbed hold of me and forced me onto the ground, where he ripped off the robe I'd just been forced to put on, and then he raped me like it was no big deal. And when he was finished, he got up and he looked down at me and he smiled. And then he turned around and walked out of the tent and left me alone. I will never forget how I felt lying on the ground after he did that to me. I will never forget how broken and shattered. I felt, who could ever want me now? Who could ever love me now? If my parents knew what had happened to me, they wouldn't want me back. Who could? I didn't want me back. My life would be better if it was just over. And I ended up falling asleep thinking those thoughts. And when I woke up, there was this man again, and he was kneeling over me. And this time he had taken a thick metal cable and had wrapped it tightly around my ankle so that I couldn't run away. And then he bolted it into place. And as I sat there, I realized that he had no intention of killing me. Well, at least not anytime soon. This place was so well hidden, and he had taken so many precautions. He had brought up so much food. He had brought up water. He had this whole cable contraption that I was now bolted into. He had no plans on letting me go, and as I sat there realizing that, I couldn't help but think of the children whose stories I'd seen on the news, the stories where only their remains had been found. And I thought, they're lucky. They are the lucky ones because no one will ever be able to make them feel the way I feel right now, ever again. They will not have to go a single day more of their life feeling this pain and this shame and embarrassment of what's happened to them. No one will ever be able to do that to them. And as I sat there thinking about it, I couldn't help but wonder, well, how long is this going to last? Is this going to be weeks, months, or will it be years? Will I be with these people until they die? Well, that could be 30 years from now. And then I started to think, well, what if I do outlive my captors? But what if it is 30 years from now? What if I don't remember who I am? My name or my family or where I come from? What then? And as I started thinking about it, I knew that I didn't want to ever forget who I was, because up until that moment, I had had a wonderful life. I mean, short, but I had a wonderful family who loved me. I had friends. I had 4 brothers who took every opportunity to tease me, but I knew still cared about me. And I had a sister. I had a lot. And I didn't ever want to forget it. So I started thinking of everything that was important to me. And I remember someone telling me that the first thing that you forget about a person is their voice. So I started to think of everyone's voice who was important to me, friends, family, but the one person whose voice was most important to me was my mom's. So I started to think of everything she used to say to me, just so I could remember what she sounded like. Things like, Elizabeth, is your room clean? Or, how was your day at school? What did you learn? Elizabeth, you don't go to school to learn nothing. Now, what did you learn? I remember the one thing I used to dread hearing every single morning was when she would walk to the middle of our house and sing, "Oh, what a beautiful morning," at the top of her lungs. I used to dread that so much. But I remember that moment. I would have given anything to hear her sing that in that moment. And as I sat there thinking of all these things she used to say to me, I remember one very specific memory after I'd come home and I'd had an incident at school that had made me really upset. And she'd gone on, she said, Elizabeth, you will meet so many people in your life, and there are so many opinions that will be made. Sometimes you'll wonder, oh, why doesn't this person like me? And then sometimes you'll wonder, oh, why does this person like me? But of all these people, there's really only a couple opinions that matter. Now, the first one is God's, and He loves you. He loves you more than you could ever comprehend. Even when you do things that aren't right or you make mistakes, He still loves you. And the second person's opinion, who you really need to worry about, is mine. And I am your mother, and I will always love you. I may not always love what you do, but I'll always love you. And nothing can never change that. And as I sat on this mountainside, I realized that she was right. I realized that she would always love me, that it didn't matter that I'd been kidnapped or chained up or raped. None of these things mattered to her. She would still love me. And that's when I made my first big, important decision. I decided that it didn't matter what I had to do. It didn't matter what happened to me or how many promises or standards that I broke. If it meant I would survive, I would do whatever it took to survive. And that decision saw me through a lot. There were times that I would have been happy to give up. But somehow, time has that funny way of continually passing. And I'd make it through that moment. And then another day would come, and I'd make it through that day. 9 months later, we actually had come not too far from here for the winter. But my captors, I won't say we, because it was my captors, they decided that it was time to move on. They had made an attempt on kidnapping another young girl from this general area, but it had failed. And so they said that they needed to move on, that the time was not yet right for them to go out and kidnap another young girl. It was just a test of their faith. They justified and manipulated everyone through religion, even themselves. So they said we needed to go to a different city. And they started to talk of big places like Boston, New York, and all I could think of was, oh my goodness, we can't go there. We absolutely cannot go there because nobody will ever find me. Nobody found me here. Why would anyone find me there? If I want to be found, we need to get back to Salt Lake. But how can I tell them to go back to Salt Lake? I mean, they have every reason not to go back to Salt Lake. So I thought about it, and I decided I would try their own tactics on them. I remember approaching them and just saying, I have this feeling. I know it sounds so crazy. God would never speak to me. But I just feel like we are supposed to go back to Salt Lake. Do you think you could please ask God? Because I know He'll answer you because, well, you are His servant. You are His prophet. I mean, you're basically His best friend. So please, could you just ask Him? Now, maybe that was stroking His ego the right way. I don't know. But if anyone ever was inspired just one time in their life, I think it was him in that moment, because he did come back and said, oh, I think you're right. We do need to return to Salt Lake. And that's how the decision to come back to Salt Lake was made. And we hitchhiked all the way back, and that, holy cow, was an adventure. I remember finally making it back into Salt Lake City, and even though I wasn't rescued at that point, I was just so happy to be back because I felt like the chances of me being rescued had just increased by about 99%. I remember walking along State Street, which, for those of you who have not been there, it's quite a large street, and it runs from one end of the Salt Lake Valley to the other end, and the heart of downtown is, well, the street runs right through it. And I remember we were still quite a ways out when all of a sudden police cars pulled up, and they surrounded us, and they all jumped out and came running over, and they started asking my captors questions. And they had a whole backstory prepared. They had told me thousands of times what I was supposed to say. And if I didn't, they had always told me that they'd kill me, that they'd kill my family, that they would come back and that they would get me. And I could never stand the thought of something happening to my family because of something I did or did not do. And up until that point, I had never really seen them fail. I mean, they had successfully kidnapped me. They had successfully hidden me. They had successfully raped me and abused me for 9 months. They'd taken me across state border, state boundaries, nothing had happened. I mean, they had stolen food from countless grocery stores. They'd stolen so much and no one had ever caught them. I mean, okay, there was one incident where I guess he was kind of caught, but he was able to get out and nothing happened to him. I mean, I had never seen them full on fail. So for me, it was almost going up against invincible powers because nothing had ever happened to them. And yet everything bad had happened to me. And the few times that I had tried had taught me, do not try again unless you are willing to pay big time. So as the police were questioning me, I felt so scared, so hopeful, but so scared at the same time. How could I let them know that it was me without saying so? Because my captors were right there. They'd hear me, and then they'd know that I had betrayed them, and they'd come back after me. But eventually, I was able to tell the police officer that I was Elizabeth Smart. And I remember he took me to the police station where I was left alone in this tiny little room, and I sat there wondering, well, if I was innocent, wouldn't they take me home? Wouldn't they let me call my parents? Well, hang on. If I'm going to jail, don't I get a phone call? Isn't that my right? But if I go to jail, compared to where I've been, that's going to be like a big step up. And right as I was thinking that, the door flew open and my dad came running into the room. And he just came over to me and he just picked me up and was hugging me. And he looked at me and said, Elizabeth, is it really you? And I remember in that moment knowing that nobody ever again would be able to hurt me the way that these two people had hurt me the last 9 months of my life. I knew that whatever lay in front of me, it'd be okay, because my dad was going to be there. I remember the officer coming back in and asking us if he could escort us up to Salt Lake to the main headquarters. And so we got into the car with him, and on the trip up, my dad said, Elizabeth, we've got to call your mother. She is going to be out for blood because she was not invited down here, and yet she was the one that answered the phone telling me to come down here. So I remember he pulled out his phone and he dialed her number, and I remember her voice coming through the other end, just the way I remembered, and she was just screaming. She was saying, Ed, is she okay? Is she all right? Let me talk to her. Pass the phone to her. And I remember he passed the phone to me, and she started saying the same things over again. Elizabeth, are you okay? Are you right? Well, say something. And right as I'm about to say something, the battery died. My dad, he's probably the greatest man you'll ever meet, kindest man you'll ever meet. I think there'll be very, very few things he has to answer for in his life, but that might be one of them. Just a thought. Anyways, I remember seeing my mom again for the first time and just thinking she looked just like an angel and being so happy that I could be back with her. The following morning after I was rescued, I was in talking with my mom, and she gave me the best piece of advice I'd like to share with you because it's changed my life. She said, Elizabeth, what this man has done to you is terrible. And there aren't words strong enough to describe how wicked and evil he is. He has stolen 9 months of your life from you that you will never get back. But the best punishment you could ever give him is to be happy, is to move forward with your life and to not let him steal another second. Because at the end of the day, God is our ultimate judge, and everything you've lost will be made up to you. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you so much, and God bless you all.